We are Board Game Academics. Hopefully you're in the right place. We are talking about leveling up your mental health today. So we'll go ahead and... I clicked the wrong button. Good, let's try that again. Okay.
Start from the beginning.
Start from the beginning.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go. There we go. I clicked the button and did the thing. Okay. So, we're here to talk about mental health. We've got a few topics that we're going to talk about here today. We're going to talk about mental health generally and kind of what that concept means, how that might be interpreted for folks. We're going to talk about mental health challenges. We're going to talk about how tabletop gaming fits into the whole mental health space. And then we're all going to kind of share our bits and bobs of solutions for how you might put the things together and create some interesting prospects here. So, let's talk about a little bit about who we are individually here. My name is Will. I am a psychologist. I work at Johns Hopkins University. I'm a big RPG person. I run a lot of tabletop role-playing games and board games in therapy.
My name's Chris. I'm a counselor, and I'm also co-host of Board Gamers Anonymous, podcast that comes out every week for about 10 and a half years, and also one of the board members for Board Game Academics.
I guess I'm next. Hello, I'm Derek. And I am not a part of Board Game Academics, but I am a good friend of theirs. I am also a psychotherapist. I feel like that's going to be a running trend here. But my focus is on designing, and this is the important part, fun games that are accessible to absolutely everyone.
My name's Anthony, and I'm not a therapist.
Aww.
I don't know why I'm here.
Damn it.
Wow.
No, I'm a teacher. I'm an instructor at Drexel University, so I teach college freshmen. And while I'm not a therapist, I definitely deal with the use of games in a lot of different settings and kind of how people engage with those. Also the co-host of Board Gamers Anonymous, so everything Chris said about that, and the editor of Board Game Academics.
All right. So let's talk about mental health and gaming. So, when we talk about mental health, it kind of brings up a lot of different concepts and ideas for people, right? It's one of those things that feels like it has a definition until you start to think about it hard enough, and then it doesn't actually have any definition at all. So I've put up some images here of things that are sort of traditionally associated with the concept of mental health, right? So, people throw around like buzzwords like self-care, like, oh, self-care is good for mental health. Okay. If we don't know what mental health is and we don't know what self-care is, what are we actually talking about, right? Things like therapy might be involved in mental health, like mental health care, right? Because it's health care, mental health care, right? Also things like keeping your brain active are for some people, getting stimulation, getting things that make sense and, keep your brain healthy. I'm curious, any other things that you all think of when you think about mental health?
Well, I think in our society we tend to think of mental health more in line with mental disorders.
Yeah, the lack of it.
Because we don't think about keeping up our care and keeping up our minds and our brains and our bodies. We think about when something's broken, especially as Americans, right?
Mm-hmm.
We deal with absolutely on or off in that binary system. And obviously one of the things that we want everyone to be able to have is quality mental health care, that they think about their mental health just as closely as they think about their physical health, because when we're talking mental health, we're talking about brain health.
Yeah. And
part of that is doing activities and programs and retrospective, introspective kind of care so that we can benefit ourselves long term. Just like, working out, like the image on the screen.
Right.
If you don't keep up with your health, then you're going to suffer long term from that. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of other definitions culturally, internationally,
Sure.
And also that's changed a bit, right? Now we're starting to take that seriously and take that as a consideration as part of our everyday, about being mindful and things of that nature.
Sure. I'll piggyback off that and add a bit more. A lot of the time when people talk about mental health, they really do reduce it to kind of just the mind, and that's not a bad thing. It's a very good starting point. But gaming specifically has a really fun, cool application in that it helps build up kind of your emotional health as well, especially through community. It helps you discover new friendships, experience new things in ways that you otherwise wouldn't. The medium is really unique compared to a lot of the other typical routes for media, because unlike things like TV where you sit there and kind of passively receive, you're actually interacting with it in some way. Because of that, gaming's also had a really bad rap for all the years, especially if you think back to like the 90s where everyone was like, is GTA teaching all of our kids to be criminals, right? Like it's not great at all, but it's interesting how the dialogue is very binary, like you guys have mentioned.
Yeah, it's part of our society. It's our chatter. It's in the zeitgeist, and it's a conversation we're having. But it's good that we now self-care, mindfulness, therapy are actual words that people use every day.
Yeah, which I think is an interesting point too of like kind of what vocabulary people are regularly using. Because one of the things we know from research is that the words that people use, even if they're not accurate, even if they're not actually useful in a clinical setting, oftentimes people know how to use those words, and like if they're using that, they're thinking about the concepts, even if maybe you still need to do some correction or you need to like interface with it in a way.
And I think that's important. Like as you mentioned, the vocabulary essential because how we talk about ourselves, to ourselves, about ourselves is essential because language is the center of being and the meaningfulness.
Yeah, a really, really good way of illustrating that is if you speak a second language, right? And if you think about that particular second language, there are going to be certain expressions that just don't translate. And if you don't speak a second language, don't worry, memes effectively work the same way, right? Like if you don't know what the meme's about, you don't find it funny, but if you do, like you're in the know. So it's interesting using things like that to examine your blind spots. One of the most poignant examples that I can think of that ties specifically to mental health care is specifically the English language has very few expressions for sad. And that's why very often we immediately borrow language from clinical terms like depression, even though it's not the same thing as sadness. And that has implications on how you understand and digest your own emotions.
Absolutely. All right, so let's talk about things that are maybe related to mental health. And these are things that we think are also kind of related to the gaming space that we're going to talk about here today. But yeah, one of the first things to be mentally healthy in a lot of ways, you have to develop a healthy self-concept. And when I say healthy self-concept, I don't necessarily mean a positive self-concept. Those two things can be related, but oftentimes mentally healthy folks are compassionate to themselves, sure, but also realistic about what is available to them, right? Because if you have a totally unrealistic view of yourself, that's not going to make you feel healthy long term, right? It's actually going to lead you up to fail spectacularly at some point down the line. So that's kind of the first task here. Another one, we all have to be connected to others. I'm often fond in therapy of saying, humans as a species, we put all of our points into cooperation and survival, which is great, except we're bad at it in a lot of ways. And so like we've done all these things to make the world a different and more interesting place, and yet you still have to be connected to other people so often, and it affects your mental and physical health. Like we know if you become isolated, you are at an increased risk of heart disease and many other different things that are like, oh, well, if you talk to people a little bit more, your blood pressure will be better.
Yes.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, loneliness directly increases how often you subscribe to OnlyFans, for example.
That true marker of health.
Yeah, real true marker. But then, like, legitimately, that has you, joking aside here, slipping into weird parasocial relationships, and we don't know how to process those very well.
No, yeah, and that parasocial relationships are interesting because, like, especially in the world in which we live, our brains can't tell the difference between certain kinds of things sometimes, and so your brain's like, yes, we have a relationship, but like, no, that is a stranger that you have never met. You feel connected to them, which is important, but you are not connected to them, which is also an important fact, right?
It just goes to show the desire to have those connections.
Yeah, well, and the funny thing is, like, I don't know if you've ever seen those, like, things on the internet where, like, somebody's Roomba, like, makes a weird noise, and they're like, no, it's okay, Roomba. We feel okay.
Yeah.
It's like, humans will pack bond with anything.
Absolutely.
Humans want to be connected to
Yeah,
stuff.
we straight up just stick Ghoulias on it, and it's like, that's our pet now.
That's I have named it. It is my son now. The last thing I want to talk about here is fostering positive spaces, right? So we've all kind of had this experience where you've been in a really toxic space. And communities that are really toxic or that have really troubling traits can lead to really toxic minds, right? I know so many people that have been part of a fandom group or a hobby or something, and they have like one profoundly bad experience, and that changes their life forever, right? Like one of my close friends, like I want to go to this thing. They're like, why would you want that? That's dumb. Only dumb people like that. And it's like, well, that lives in your head now forever.
Sure.
And one of the things that I think is important, especially as we're talking to groups around hobbies and fandoms and things, is how can you better the communities that you're in? How can you create more welcoming, positive spaces that don't give people those things, or at least less often give people.
You want to safeguard your mental health, but also the mental health of everyone that's around you, because you participate, you lend yourself to that, or you subtract yourself from that.
Absolutely.
Which causes damage to yourselves and others around you.
Yeah, and like one of the things we know, I mean, a community requires people in it.
Yes.
Like if it's just you, like anger posting on the internet, like that could be a thing. People could develop into that, but like, wouldn't it be nicer if everybody was in the space and just getting something out of it? I don't know if it has to be the same something, but getting something out of it. Yeah. All right, so let's talk some incredibly depressing statistics. Woo! Speaking of words that are not very useful in the English language. 1 in 5 adults in the United States deals with some sort of mental health concern, like a diagnosable mental health concern. It's 22.8% of the U.S. population. For numbers, that's 57.8 million people, which if I told you that 57.8 million people had any kind of problem at all, that's a very large number. It's almost beyond our ability to comprehend.
Sure.
Yeah, and I believe that number is climbing. Ooh.
Yeah, it's going up. Yeah.
And also underreported, because again,
yeah.
stigma with mental health, which is fading but still true.
Absolutely.
And then again, like you mentioned, there's a lot of cultures that don't have language around mental health, so may not identify it as such, or may identify it as something else.
Yeah, or they borrow it really badly. Like
Yes.
I used to work in Hong Kong, and they're like, oh, well, I guess mental health is whatever the British published in the ICD. So an eating disorder is when you're overweight, right? Well, look at this girl over here. She weighs more than 100 pounds. She's obviously overweight, and that's just the culture. Doesn't matter how tall you are, what your build is. And you'd end up seeing tons and tons of people coming in specifically for eating disorders because of that. And there's no understanding that maybe the model that's been designed here doesn't apply, or doesn't apply in the same way.
Absolutely, and I think that's one of those things that is important for us to recognize talking about mental health. You know, arguably we're all kind of talking from a certain lens here, but there's many different things going on, and this sort of exportation of, or the export rather, of sort of the American sort of Western ideas of how medicine works and how treatment works, sometimes don't fit for people. And that's important to note, because then you don't want to perpetuate that for yourself, right? One of the other problematic things here is less than half the people that show up in these statistics are actually getting some sort of active treatment in mental health, which is pretty rough, right? Because then you're talking about, you know, okay, they're concerned about it enough to respond to this survey that has been sent out, but they aren't getting anything done. They don't have any regular intervention about it. And that's, you know, not to say that 100% necessarily should be the goal, I suppose, but if you're talking about a problem and a lot of people have it and fewer than half of them are able to access care or desiring to access some sort of solution to it, then you're about to see other problems. And we talked about this a little bit earlier, but mental health and physical health are really related, right? And so if something's happening for you mentally, it is probably going to show up physically in your body somewhere at some point. And it will probably also show up in your life in other ways. So plenty of people, I work at a university, almost everyone that walks through the door, you know, they come in and they're like, here's this problem that I'm having. And it's framed in, I can't do tests right, or I'm having a problem with my friends or something, which that is when it has evolved to a point, now it's a problem. And I think that's an interesting thing to keep in mind, that if this keeps going, you're going to see a lot of different problems that ultimately, you know, you could track back.
Yeah, and I think we see that. I think it's mental health is a societal pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely.
And during the COVID-19 pandemic, more than anything else, we saw how few people were receiving treatment and needed treatment, and still to this day, people are still dealing with the post-traumatic stressors from that situation, and are continuing today. And then even when those people are receiving care, oftentimes they're underserved by that care. So maybe they don't have the proper mental health care that they need to have, because again, a lot of these conditions sometimes are very specialized, and not every practitioner can meet the needs of every client. And then again, maybe they don't have the language to kind of work with, again, different populations and cultures and things of that nature. But if and when they don't get that care, whether they're underserved or not served at all, then now you're having physical ailments that are following seriously behind it.
Yeah.
And sometimes a lot of those mental health problems are because of physical ailments or because of prescriptions and medications and things like that. So it can be an indicator of a problem. And again, general practitioners, doctors are typically not trained in mental health care or emergency services, so how would they know? Take another pill.
Yeah, that said, I'm the one foreigner here. I'm from Canada, and it always amazes me every time I talk to any of my American friends or come down here and see how there's almost like a snake eating its own tail type way of doing medicine, because
Yes.
you take one pill for one problem, but now the side effects give you another problem, so you got to take a pill for that and another pill for that, and now you've got 8,000 prescriptions in like a healthcare bill in the like 7 digits or something. Rather than looking at, let's say, healthcare in a more holistic manner, where your mental affects your physical and whatever else. In fact, going back to the whole language thing, should we even divide the terms between mental and physical, right?
Well, they separate for insurance issues.
Oh, of course, but that's the problem, right? Everything's effectively done for the bottom dollar, not for your well-being. That's also why talking about all this stuff, at least from a therapy perspective, is really important, but I think it's equally important to talk about it from a therapeutic angle, because therapy isn't necessarily the same thing as what's therapeutic. And while a lot of these adults may not be getting professional treatment, that doesn't mean that we as people don't necessarily have responsibilities to the people around us to try and make sure that they're taken care of while we take care of ourselves. And there is a lot to be said about the democratization of that care and to have that responsibility, even if it's something simple like sharing a moment through a game where you're laughing about something stupid you all did.
Absolutely, which is something that we are going to kind of continually bring up, I think, today as we keep going. Let's talk about the mental health challenges, though, specifically. So these are kind of related to what we were just kind of talking about, the prevalence rates of things. These are just some of the most common prevalence rates of mental health concerns in the U.S. population. Got the concern, the prevalence, maybe how it might show up in a gaming space. The big ones tend to be things like anxiety. 20% of the population of the population that we talked about earlier. Depression, 8%, something like that. Social isolation, I put on there. That's, of course, my wheelhouse. That was what my dissertation was about, especially related to the pandemic and post-pandemic, right? We all learned how to do things on Zoom. We learned how some things were really great on Zoom. Like, you could do therapy on Zoom, and it, breaks a lot of barriers. We also learned how some things are very bad on Zoom. Like, trying to play games on Zoom is sometimes terrible. And also, one of the ones I pulled here, trauma. So the rate of population that has PTSD is about 3%, something like that. But 70% of the population has experienced a traumatic event.
Yes.
Which is important, right? Because we're not talking, as you pointed out, not necessarily talking about people that are diagnosable in a treatment center kind of setting. But what are you going to do? If 70% of the population has experienced something that's really intense, that's probably going to show up at your gaming table at some point.
Sure.
Soon, if it hasn't showed up for you already.
Yeah, at that point, it's just the new normal, right?
Yeah, right. If everybody is this, then nobody isn't, right? Yeah.
And again, we don't typically have the language around that to provide necessarily proper care.
Yeah.
And again, just knowing that that is occurring is something that we can at least address on some level, even if it's in a very small way, to be kind and compassionate, because again, we don't know the battle that other people are fighting.
Yeah, there are some small adaptations that people are making right now. For example, if you are an RPG player and you go to a convention, a lot of the times that just to sign up to play in any pickup game, they'll have you agree to some sort of safety tool, like an X card or something like that. Doesn't necessarily mean it'll be used, doesn't necessarily mean it'll be used in the right way, but there is something there that's supposed to be meant to help protect the players.
Absolutely. And, I think one of the things talking about the adaptations is kind of how people adapt their habits and gaming around their mental health kind of stuff. One of the things I talk with people a lot is I know so many people that feel anxious and they have what is their emotional support game?
Sure.
Where I play this game incessantly all the time because I know it. There is nothing surprising or shocking.
Predictability is helpful
Right.
and reassuring and provides structure. We talk about favorite movies or favorite, comfort foods and things like that.
Yep.
People get that as game as well.
Yeah, and look, I can't tell you the amount of people I know that are I'm going to log into World of Warcraft and do my dailies because
Sure.
it gives my life a sense of structure and purpose that it is otherwise absent. And I'm that's But
please pick a better game.
yeah, maybe play a better game.
Yeah.
But
it's also helpful for us to know in the general public that when either our friends gaming at the table or if we game in general public, someone's behavior at the table might be more than just what's occurring at that game.
yeah,
And if you have here in your slide, there are things that we can take a look at and understand and maybe help them address or support them in addressing so that they can be a more active participant in the activity that they're sharing that will hopefully benefit them.
Yeah. I'd actually argue that it's always more.
Yes.
At the table only, yeah.
Almost, yeah.
almost
Sure.
always. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the only thing I would leave here is to say that, like, based on the prevalence rates and based on what we know about the population, you have already experienced this probably in
Yes.
some way, right? If you haven't, maybe it's you, or you're about to experience it, right? And I think that's important because the more we can kind of bring a sensitivity into that space, not necessarily structure everything around like some specific safety tool if that's not everybody's speed, but just being understanding of what's likely to show up in your gaming spaces can help us be a little bit more prepared. All right. So let's talk about ways that games can help people, right? So this is talking about mental health. Some of these are pretty obvious. Things like gaming can reduce stress, depending on the game you're playing.
Yeah,
Might make a lot of sense, right?
No League of Legends.
Yeah, don't play. The amount of people that come into my office are like, I was playing League last night. I'm like, stop. Don't do that.
And look, you're cured. Bye.
Yeah, I've solved your problems. But those kind of things, right? Like reducing stress. Oh, it can improve your mood. Yeah, sure. That seems obvious, right? You play a game, you enjoy games. Now you feel enjoyment. Great. Some of these are a little bit more subtle, though. Things like playing certain kind of games can really affect how your brain develops and how your brain maps things, right? Long time ago, video games rot your brain, and now like you do surgery using like robotic chopsticks, and
Sure.
they're like, oh yeah, gamers are actually better at that than the average population. I wonder why. And it's like because the
Yeah, the thing.
the thing. But also things like, I run RPGs for folks, and the amount of times the increase in confidence piece of this comes in, like, I cannot tell you the amount of people that come in and they are, like, dead silent the first time you hang out with them. Like, it's pulling teeth to get them to engage with the game. And then later, they're great. Like, they're leading the conversation. They are in charge of everything in the story. They've created for themselves some sort of role. Like, that's really important that you can kind of see a development through people in a hobby that maybe encourages a little bit of mastery, or at least lets you feel some stuff that maybe you normally have felt in your life, in your everyday situations.
Yeah, there's something about gaming where you become part of the game, you bleed into the character, the decisions you're making you feel reflect upon you or act upon you, and there needs to be help and support as far as how that feels and what that means, but also it gives you an opportunity to engage with, as we mentioned earlier, stressful situations like being a carry in Legends. And at the same time, because it's fantasy, because it's collaborative storytelling, you can somewhat detach yourself, have that engagement, but not feel threatened, or hopefully not feel so personally threatened from that. So it allows a lot of people to practice those kind of real-world environments in a virtual world, a real unworld.
Yeah, I wouldn't go so far as to call it a safe space, but that's effectively what it's supposed to be. It's a place where you can experiment with things that you typically couldn't in real life, or have, and it got you into a lot of trouble. There's a really amazing gentleman by the name Dave who runs a library that travels around the continental United States called the Alexandria RPG Library. And he started the whole thing because he has PTSD from participating in the war. And he started it actually because he was playing D&D at the time and was playing a barbarian and would rage in game, kill a lot of stuff, immediately suffer the consequences, and then be like, wait a minute, this is just like how I am in real life. And realized from that experience that maybe he shouldn't do that. And that was just a happy accident. It was enough to get him starting this whole thing where he's got tons of volunteers, everyone a war vet, to be able to, through the love of the game and teaching the game to other people, also find healing for themselves. And the whole point of me sharing the anecdote is really just to say that gaming isn't actually something that just ends as soon as you put the dice down. It's the community that you can carry with afterwards, the skills that you learn from that. And, really, it's a bit of a weird phenomenon, but there's a lot of times where, like, we'll reduce a game to something, to kind of just its parts whenever we've fallen out of love with it. Like, oh, you just hit Q to win, you and your alt charge. But it's when the game has something to teach you that means something to you, that you'll like be really wrapped up in it. You'll notice your own language about it being different, and that's a good indicator that gaming is doing something really positive for you.
Yeah, couldn't have said it better myself. So let's talk a little bit about therapy. We've kind of mentioned it a few times and sort of mental health treatment, but there's a lot of ways that gaming gets used in therapeutic settings. Like I do it multiple times a week at this point. But one of the things, play therapy. If you ever went to a therapy as a kid, you'd have some like sort of kindly psychology person, and they would be like, "Let's play a game," and you'd be like playing Uno or whatever, and then like they'd get you talking about your feelings. You can do that to adults,
Yes,
in a way. Like I do this a lot, right? You're like, "Oh, let's play some D&D about it," and then they just like start talking about something, and you're like, "Oh, well, guess we did learn something today, right?" You can do that same kind of thing, right? Things like group therapy, right? That's what I do a consistent amount of my week. You get a bunch of people together, you're doing what is traditionally a normal group therapy kind of a thing in a psychological way, but it's more engaging, or it's differently engaging, right? Because it allows you to create a hypothetical space that maybe allows the group participants to interact with each other in a way you wouldn't normally have access to.
There's a different type of accessibility that's available through games. It's not like the only thing that provides different accessibility. There's like a million different types of therapy styles out there. For example, you could run up a mountain and yell off of it, and that's primal yelling therapy. That's a legitimate thing, by the way. You can look it up, and it helps people. And not to kind of reduce things into super trite oversimplifications, especially about the sexes, but there's something specifically that in my practice I found a lot of men gravitate more towards, which is it's a lot easier not talking face to face but shoulder to shoulder, and being able to focus on a task together like a game is a great way of getting them to access different parts of themselves that they would otherwise close off.
Yeah, absolutely. And the only thing I was going to add here is kind of as Derek alluded to earlier, like teaching skills in sandboxes is a really interesting way to get things done. So I do this in D&D a lot, where I'll tell people the worst thing that could possibly happen to you in D&D is I would kill your character, which would be like distressing, but nothing would happen to you. You'd probably be mad at me at some point, but that's fine.
How dare you, DM?
Yeah, how dare I kill your character? No, you killed your character, friend. Like, or the dice did. Which,
You made choices.
Yeah, you made choices. But like you can put everything into that sandbox, and like you said, like maybe you won't have that rejecting experience. And like if I'm the DM, I'm in control of the world, sort of. I can set that up for you so you can be more successful than you have been in the past. And that's really important for folks. Like, I want to try this thing out, but I don't really have a space for it. I'm afraid if I go into the spaces I exist in, that if I make a mistake, it'll follow me around the rest of my life. And like, okay, go talk to this hypothetical merchant who doesn't exist, and like, let's just run that conversation 10 times and see how that makes sense for you. Like, I worked with somebody once where we time traveled every interaction. And so he would like go into alternate realities and like, let's actually try that again. And he would like go to a different one.
Oh, so like an isekai anime.
Yeah, he isekai'd
okay.
himself
Cool.
every time, which is like very interesting because like he chose to isekai himself investigating a crime, and so he would like go back and then like redo it again. I'm like, okay.
I mean, gaming allows us to make interesting decisions at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And practice those decisions like you were saying. So having the opportunity to try those things out, try out not just new decisions, but new versions of yourself.
Yeah.
New avatars of yourself. Maybe you can be a little more extroverted, or maybe you could be a different gender. Whatever else you want to try out that are different aspects and dimensions of who you are as a person and situations, because as we all know, we carry our world with us. We're not just an individual, we're a cosmos of different people, different situations, and different categories all at the same time. So when you sit down at the game table, especially with an RPG, you are lending that world out. It's integrating with the fantasy world that you're about to participate in. And then, as you mentioned, as you leave, you're taking a piece of that fantasy world with your larger world, and now bringing that out with you as well. So it's a constant interaction and interweaving, melding back and forth, but all of that is part of you. So it allows you a really good opportunity to kind of engage in that kind of nourishment and wellness care.
Absolutely. The only thing I would add is your brain can't tell the difference between fantasy and reality in a lot of ways. It can in the fact that like you are in reality versus in a game, right?
Yeah, I'm like, that's what drugs taught me.
That's what doing all the drugs taught me. No, but your brain, like if you experience a thing, like it's a memory the same way anything else is.
Sure.
And you of course remember the context, but like your brain's just like, oh yeah, we did that.
It's like a dream.
Yeah, it's like a dream, right? So something to think about. All right, so what kind of challenges do we notice that are common in our gaming spaces? Anyone can shout one out. Anyone here have something they've noticed or think is important? And otherwise, we can stare at each other for a minute or two, and then I'll switch slides.
Yeah, I mean, I can lead with one. This is very specific to me as a
Good for
game
you.
designer, but please, everyone, please recognize that the category is called RPGs, not D&Ds. There's more than just one game. It's not in my opinion anyways, it's not a very good one, and it's not something that you need to force fit into everything else. It falls back to earlier we were talking about like falling into games that you play out of familiarity, and it kind of perpetuates itself like that. But there are tons of different RPGs out there that lend themselves to very different experiences, very different fun times, different facets of yourself that can be tried out in a lot of different ways. That's not only good for therapy, but also just a good time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, there's, as you mentioned, as far as the game itself and the mechanics in which you're employing, and for the general public, they may not understand that there are differences and that those differences lead to different types of experiences. And then obviously, the gamers themselves at the table also lend to a different experience, even if it's the same game. So you can't step in the same river twice. There's different challenges there. So if you do have people that come to the table that are dealing with mental health challenges, issues, or they're bringing their world here, or they're having challenges, or you're having challenges, or the group themselves, the dynamics. I mean, at a game table, whether it's a tabletop game, board game, or it's an RPG, the situation as far as like those groups, that people, their particular issues and dynamics are playing out.
Yeah.
So you're not just managing your own mental health situation, but you are experiencing other people's as well at the same time and trying to separate and think, where do I begin and where do they end?
Absolutely. One thing I was going to put forth, I think maybe we talked about it yesterday a little bit, but it's really hard to determine what buy-in looks like in gaming space sometimes. I have to check myself on this consistently as a DM. Like, I've been running a game for like 3 years consistently, and like there is one guy in that group who talks twice per session. And like he usually says something entertaining or interesting, but like it's been so hard for me to like wrap my brain around how this person enjoys this session. Cause like you don't do anything. I'm trying to help you. But the thing is, like from his perspective, he's like, I love this.
Yes.
This is exactly how I want to engage. I am having the time of my life doing this. And that's really hard because like sometimes you're playing a game with somebody and you're just like, you hate this.
Yes.
You are having a bad time right now. And they like internally they're like, this is the best. This is the greatest time I've ever had. And it's hard to notice that.
Everyone has different goals.
Everyone has different goals, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to even generalize a little on that, I think we all have preconceptions
Yes.
about what people want from a game, what they expect from a game, what a game is going to do for them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just, from a teaching perspective at least, like trying to wipe as much of that away as possible, so that you don't put someone in a position where they have to disappoint you or others, or you don't put them in a position where they feel like they need to understand something that they don't.
Yeah. To flip that background, make it a little more specialist again into therapy, this is something that we were all taught in school, and we have to remind ourselves all the time, which is, as therapists, we don't know shit. Like legitimately, we go through a bunch of training. We might plan out to have this like perfect epiphany, and then we'll say it to our client, and it'll just bounce off and they'll be like, okay, yeah, whatever, and it just goes over their head. And then later on, I might say like the most random dumb thing that I didn't intend anything with. They're like, you just changed my life. Thank you so much. I'm healed. And I'm like, what just happened? But it's the same idea with this, where like you have to have a level of humility with it all. There are going to be things in a game that everyone is going to enjoy differently, and you have to make space for that.
And also in games too, as we know, like you mentioned from D&D, but there's so many games out there, whether they're board games, RPGs, miniature games, LARPing, stuff like that. there's also, in those games itself, innately in those games, there is set sometimes challenges. There's problematic language and systems that are in there
Yes.
that may be discriminatory on some level or maybe problematic on some level.
Yeah, we can have a whole other panel on that.
We might.
But again, that's something to be aware of as you enter a game, and there might be triggers for you personally or for the group generally, and also selecting the proper game for that group is essential.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that I try to keep humble on when I'm running games is just like, they're going to tell you what's interesting and important, and then like you're going to be stuck with it in a gaming sense. Like in one of the games I run at work, there is a bear named Ziggy who is a wizard. He is not a wizard. He is just a literal bear. But they're like, we found this bear. Is he a wizard? No, he's not a wizard. Like, bears can't, they don't have a high enough intellectual score to do that. And they're like, we're going to teach him to read. I'm like, okay. And now, like, every session, like, what's Ziggy doing? I'm like, I don't know, dude. He's a bear. You brought the bear with you into town. He is just, like, walking through the market, and people are concerned. And they're like, yeah, concerned at how cool he is.
Because he's a wizard.
Like,
Join us in our world.
yeah, we're telling a shared story together.
That's right.
Yeah, but like I wouldn't call that a challenge. That's really cool. That actually highlights
Challenge for me.
Yeah, like
This is the DM.
it specifically highlights why I mentioned earlier that D&D is such a bad game.
Yeah.
And part of what makes it such a good product is the fact that it's a bad game, because the DM has to do so much work to make things fit, and it feels really personalized and special to the group afterwards. Like, this is a fun core memory you're going to carry with you. So, I don't know, it's a little weird. Like, sometimes it's the stuff you do around the game rather than the game itself that
Oh, yeah.
is really, really awesome.
Absolutely. And I also often think a lot of the good stuff that we experience in gaming is the stuff around the game rather than the game itself. Speaking of, let's talk about how games are sort of helping us in everyday life. Less so therapy, more so things that you're doing. Okay, so creating community. You all are at this event, which taking place in a community by and for, allegedly, a group of people that like certain things, right?
This sounds a lot like some alien brain snatcher here, like, welcome, humans.
Yes. I mean, look, it's been a long weekend, okay? But it's important to build communities that are healthy enough to have these kind of events, and it's important that these events be at least relatively healthy for some of the people that show up into them, right? Like, I'm a longtime anime fan. I can't tell you the amount of times I've been to an anime convention where it's like, this is the one time of a year that this person is going to be able to engage with people that like the stuff that they like. And that's a really big deal psychologically. And it isn't even like a medical or therapeutic intervention. It's just like being around people that care about the stuff you care about in an environment that allows you to be yourself a little bit more, maybe, goes a long way for a lot of people.
Though I really wish sometimes people wouldn't run up to me and hit me with a body pillow before saying hi. But, yeah.
Yeah, well, sometimes in the community you have to set standards or, talk about rules,
Yeah.
put up signs,
Something.
Yeah.
Essentially, that's what gaming is, right?
Yeah.
You need a cooperative group to sit down,
Yeah.
agree to rules, and standards of play.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out those rules and standards of play are what makes the game fun.
Yeah. Even if the game is completely competitive and you want to kill each other afterward.
Sometimes, especially if. So here are ways that games also are helping you. Some of these are repeats, of course, from the therapy one because it's both therapy and not therapy. But some of these are just, normal things. Like one of the things I know we've talked about before, like the importance of play. Like play is a human, natural thing that we all do at some point in our lives, right? It's really important to have that in your life because, like, this conception that, like, only children engage in these kind of things and then you grow out of it is wrong and unhelpful. So, okay, you're doing this kind of thing, right? Games can also help you set realistic goals. I do this every time I play a new game because I am not going to win this game. I know this already. I am listening to the rules be read to me, and I'm like, hi, I am going to try to come in third.
I like how you corrected that. You're just like, I'm listening
I do not
to
read
someone
this.
else.
I have not read the rule book of a game that I was not teaching in a very long time. But I'm like, cool, there are 5 people at this table. My goal is not to come in last. That's a realistic goal that I could potentially get to today. Whereas, like, if I, you're going to win. Like, not realistic. Wouldn't help me. The other thing, too, is, like, sometimes games build skills or promote our learning, right? How many games do we have that have like an interesting or educational theme or are built in some way that like hinges on our knowledge of knowing some esoteric detail? You know, some games are built exclusively to that, like show off the things that you might actually know, right?
Trivia Pursuit, anyone?
Yeah.
Yeah, in my experience working in career centers for the last 20 years, utilizing gaming to help people understand that they do have specialized skills, and those things are discoverable through that kind of experiential education that they have in a game. And again, it's not that they have to practically, realistically deal with logistics of moving corn across the country, but hey, if they like making those interesting choices that the game provides for them, that might lend itself to a particular career or skill set that they might want to invest in, or they might have that skill set already or that personality that might, again, lend itself to a particular area of expertise and interest that they might have.
I didn't realize American Career Centers made people play Oregon Trail.
Well, you don't want to die of dysentery, that's all I'm saying.
The one on here that I think I wanted to call out because it's a little bit more clinical, but one of the important parts of our lives as daily humans is stopping our stress cycle, right? Our brain sits and like simmers and bubbles and like stress chemicals all day long because the whole modern world is incredibly stressful and our brain isn't designed to handle it. Games are a really good example of ways you can kind of break out of that cycle, because games can be very stressful and they can be a very like long-term like feeling, but also they're fun. And at the end of it, hopefully, depending on how you played, maybe you walk away from it like feeling, oh, this is a thing that happened, there's an clear ending, there's a resolution, and I then go back to whatever is after this, right? And for our brains, that's a really important thing for us to be able to do for our biology, right? It feels weird to say, but like your brain going down on the stress and then coming right back up immediately is still better for you than being stressed all the time.
Sure.
And so if a gaming experience can give you like a bite-sized or otherwise sized situation and there's a clear beginning, middle, end, and then you do a thing, that really helps your brain a lot of the time. And it like you can't have fun and be threatened at the same time. So your brain's like, well, I guess this is fun. It's good.
You haven't played Left 4 Dead though.
Okay, I played Left 4 Dead a lot. That's true. But you wanted to be threatened. You signed up for that.
That's actually segueing really well into the point I was going to add, which is that a part of this is not necessarily just stopping that stress cycle, but having the control over it.
Yeah.
Right? A lot of daily life is being just accosted by things that won't let you have any sort of say, and that really batters you and wears you down. But having the ability to say, no, like, I specifically want to go have my pants stained from watching the witch charge at me in Left 4 Dead is something that you pick yourself, and that's fun.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I think that's a fundamental part of gaming is that you get to, most of the time, I think, choose your experience. But also, like, the things that are cool and interesting and relaxing for one person are very different. And, you know, like, you get a group of people together and they're like, I like these incredibly terrifying horror games. And I'm like, I would never play that if you paid me money. And they're like, right, I do it on purpose. Like, okay.
But will you do it just so I can laugh at you?
Ooh.
Yeah.
How much joy do you think it would give you?
I mean, I maybe make it a whole bullet point right there. Just watch people suffer. Games are helping.
Okay, well then...
A certain sense of Schadenfreude.
Yeah. It's sort of like a cost-benefit, right? Like, how much would I feel terrified and stain my pants versus how happy would you be?
Yeah.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
well I'm willing.
Yeah.
Next year we'll put it in.
Yeah, we got to run some tests.
We'll run some tests. Oh, no. We got to be sure. Is it replicatable?
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about neurodiversity, right? The neurospicy folks here. Games work really nicely for folks whose brains work a little bit differently. One of the things we know, of course, is that everybody's brain works a little bit differently, because I don't think I've met a baseline normal human in my life. But
if they tell you they're normal, they're an alien.
yeah, they're body snatchers, like they're pod people. But games work really well for this population. Games especially help because there's rules, and rules make sense sometimes, right? But like I can't tell you the amount of people I've worked with that are neurodivergent, and we're like talking about, you know, oh, how do I talk to this person in this RPG? And I'm like, you do this, and then if it's good or bad, and then you roll a die about it. And they're like, okay, I can understand that. Like, the die is random and unhelpful in a lot of ways, perhaps, but like, this could give you advantage. Oh, good things give me a bonus. Makes sense, right? And other games are like that too, where it's like, if I do this thing, I get this. The modern world does not work that way for the majority of people. And it's really nice to have something that does work that way.
Well, I mean, it kind of stops working that way as soon as you're not like 5 anymore. You're like, uh-oh.
Yeah, right.
I don't get the world anymore. Yeah.
And that's why it's good to re-enter that kind of system where interactions do have structure, do have meaning, do have purpose, and I can find out those rules through the people around me, so then the world gets a little smaller, a little more manageable, and then I feel a little more confident in other interactions I might be having in the future.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I will say a huge amount of the work I do as a DM in therapeutic settings is just like clarifying how rules work.
Sure.
Like, here is how the world works. They don't always ask me,
Sure.
and then some weird stuff happens, but I'm like, if you were to ask me, does this happen? Yes. And, you know, like, I had a character one time, they were like, how does necromancy work? And I'm like, I don't know. They're like, well, think about it and tell me. I'm like, okay. Well, you have to summon the spirits and you have to talk to them, and it's like a really actually very lovely process where like there's like sort of a seance and like, hey, can I use your body for this thing? You want to be a zombie? You want to be like a ghost? Like, how does that work? And they're like, okay, that makes sense. And I'm like, why did I do that? But okay, it prompts me to think about how that works, but then it also allows them to like, okay, I can understand this, because like maybe they would have felt bad about engaging with something unless they knew the rules around it, right?
Yeah, you definitely sold it better than just be like, I just called them up on Discord or whatever. That was
Yeah.
enough. Yeah.
Like, I don't know, like, hey man, you up? You want to
Yeah.
be a zombie?
And it gives us a better idea, no matter where you are on the spectrum, and we all are on the spectrum at, on some level, some point.
Truly.
It provides for us to also understand, as you said, things I haven't thought about before.
Yeah.
And then if I'm not thinking about things within a small framework of the game, what else in life have I not thought about? What other considerations have I not been able to make? And if you do want to be able to provide accessibility to any number of people at any level, you have to think about the things that typically you don't think about, because the things you don't think about, you take for granted. You've been privileged just to walk through a certain area, but if you're in a wheelchair or if you have some special needs and something else, it might have a number of different challenges, but again, you need to be able to see it from their perspective, not from yours.
Absolutely. One other thing I was going to add too is like, the game's a good game, or if you're playing it right, it can follow your brain in a lot of ways where like reality can't in a lot of ways, or where people are unwilling to follow your brain in reality. I know this, my kid sister has ADHD. She tells stories in the form of the earth cooled, the dinosaurs came, and then she tells you the entirety of human history, and then she gets to the point of her story, which like for me is fine. I grew up with that. I'm like, yep, she's just doing that. But sometimes like you set up a game to do this thing, and like that's not the interesting part of the thing that anybody cares about. Like, one of the most fun sessions that anybody ever had in a therapeutic game I ever ran was they went to Magic Walmart and like just went shopping. And they're like, oh, I'm going to go do this. I'm going to buy this. Does it have this? Like, is the checkout lady cute? Like, like doing all this weird stuff. And like, we spent 2.5 hours shopping. Not like actually shopping, just like pretending to shop. What are we doing? And they're like, that's what we wanted to do today. I'm like, great. The game was there for you for that. I didn't write any of that, but like the game was there for you, and
Yeah, I feel like I have to make that an actual thing now. Just Magic Walmart. Maybe I can get cross-branded.
I'm just saying, like, there's collaboration opportunities. And the last thing here, increasing freedom and flexibility, right? So one of the things that we know helps for people that maybe struggle with how things work is like, can you increase their ability to determine options? Can you increase their ability to feel a little bit more agency in choosing things? And that's a lot easier if the things are fun or funny or have non-terrible consequences, right? Because it's like, for example, I was running a group and they were like, we want to know how romantic relationships work. And I'm like, okay, I don't know that I'm the expert that can tell you that, but like, sure. They're like, let's run it. And they're like, cool. For some reason, they all wanted to flirt with NPCs. They didn't want to flirt with each other, which I thought was a bold choice because you are now flirting with me, a 35-year-old man, which is an interesting choice for you college students, but let's go with it. But it's like, that would be terrifying for them to go up, like, I like this person, I'm going to flirt with them. That would go catastrophically terribly. And they're like, can I do this? I'm like, yes, you can. I'm not here to tell you that would be successful, but you can do that. Yeah. And then like building around like, okay, how could this be more safe? How could this be more interesting?
Yeah, so long as they don't, quite literally take it out of the game and approach someone and then stop, roll a die to see whether they successfully wooed them or not.
I've not been able to make that work in real life, no.
Yeah.
But to be fair, it's better than most Netflix shows.
Yeah.
Okay.
Guys, hold on. We might have to write a Netflix show. That actually sounds brilliant. And, vaguely patronizing, but aren't all Netflix shows?
They are all. Yeah.
I think we got this.
By the very nature.
All right, so games are making a difference out there. I'll talk about some of these, I think, in a therapeutic lens, but also in terms of like how they promote mental health generally. So one of the things, and we talk about this a lot, I work at a university. Games are really great to be like, hey, fellow kids, we enjoy doing fun things. Do you like fun things? Come do fun things at our fun therapy center. Yeah, it's incredibly lame, and it's exactly as bad as that sounds, but like, just getting out there and being normal people, like, hey, let's play this game, do whatever. You're not even doing anything therapeutic, but you are like being human with people, and especially in mental health, there's this
goes
like,
a long way.
It goes a long way,
Yeah.
and like the misconceptions that are out there, or like the intimidation of the thing, like, oh, I have to go do this and I have to fill out these forms, and it's like, no, just like show up to this thing, we'll talk, we'll play a game, maybe it'll be fine, right? And I will say for myself, it makes me the cool therapist, because like everyone else is like a bunch of lamos, and there's like, oh, but that guy, he plays games. I'm like, okay. But, it works. Also, another thing here, games often tap populations that therapy doesn't do great at, or mental health doesn't do great at. Games are often written in different languages or different, colloquial style that, people in healing professions don't always do well at. People are like, oh, very serious and very, I'm going to do this. And it's like, no, they don't want that. They want you to, like, be real with them, right? And that can be a way to both access that, but also to kind of speak a collective language with people temporarily, and then maybe go from there. Maybe some of it is burying the sort of therapy in the sort of cheese. Like, sure. You're like, here's this pill, but like, I did give you some cheese, so like we're good, right? But sometimes it's just a little easier to like, okay, how can we speak a collective tongue?
So I'll actually pop in there and add a little bit. It's not just about using games to speak a collective language. It's that, especially to like underserved populations, it's understanding that there are so many more options for games than we realize as well. There are, for example, a whole slew of Japanese-made tabletop RPGs, and the experience is completely different than D&D. Same idea with, let's say, Euro games, right? If anyone knows what those are with board games, because they're all about scoring points and like building a functioning rail system, whereas like the North American game is let's stab stuff. So it's so super different. In fact, like I immediately thought of like at least 6 Japanese RPGs that are literally Magic Walmart when you were talking about them. So yeah, like taking those types of games and bringing that into our own experience is a really great way of tapping into sides of ourselves we didn't realize existed too.
Absolutely. The only thing I have on here also is oftentimes it can create easier methods to like reach people. So one of the things that like therapy is like a lot of therapy is one-on-one or it's small groups, which is great. Those are fine. It's amazing. But I work at a university. We have a certain amount of students. We physically, spiritually, existentially cannot see every person on that campus. It is impossible for us to do so unless they increased our budget by 500% and gave us our own castle, which is like, great, I would love that. I'm waiting for the castle. But that's not going to happen. And so it's like, okay, how can you get to the people out there and talk to them, teach them something, just be engaged with them? And like, a game is a great thing. Like, we, during finals last year, got together and were like, hey, let's teach people how to play TTRPGs. Any of them. Let's just go. Like, we'll get some pizza, get some drinks, just like hang out. And it's like, yeah, okay, part of it was like we bribed them with pizza because they don't want to be studying for finals. But like the other part of it's just like these are people that weren't going to come in. Yeah, not until maybe next fall.
Yeah, but like honestly, free calories for a starving college student, yeah,
look,
easy.
Some people might call it bribery. Some people call it effective outreach management.
Yeah,
but,
activations, whatever.
Yeah, whatever gets them there. And I think that's a big piece of it, right? Like, you can try to lower the barriers all you want and be very clever and smart, but like sometimes it's just like, just go out there and just talk to people and exist. All right, so let's talk about top games that we think are pretty cool for mental health kind of things. So,
oh wow, I
dang.
recognize one up there.
Dang, Derek.
It's D&D, right?
Yeah,
D&D.
of course.
You played it before?
Yeah,
Cool.
definitely.
So I picked some of these for RPG kind of stuff. Obviously, I use D&D a lot in my work, not necessarily because it's the best TTRPG, because it isn't, but because it is name brand recognition, right? You can just be like, hey, kids, D&D, and they're like, yes, I have heard of that. I watch Stranger Things. Great. So now we have something to talk about. And then we go from there, right?
Yeah, it's short for like Dungeons and Dorks, right?
Yes. Yeah. Domiciles and, yeah. Anyway. So that's a good thing. Like TTRPGs, a lot of them are very different from one another, and I think one of the things that you can do here is think about what fits for you, right? If going to Magical Walmart is all you want to do, and you have a group that does that, great. Make that the whole game. Just have fun, right? One of the things I quite like Blades in the Dark for is like Blades in the Dark, the way the system is set up, is just kind of like a lot of things operate on vibes in ways, which is kind of nice when you're working with people because they're like, I want to do this thing, and like instead of going, okay, what skill does that? Like, what's your highest ability modifier? Can you get it? And like, there's like, I'm doing this, and you're like, great,
Yeah.
and then you just do that.
I also love the fact that you can pitch it that way. Like D&D is all about making like, you know, this athletics check, this
Yeah.
endurance check or whatever, and then Blades is just like, it's a vibe check. You're good to go. Yeah.
How are the vibes today? Terrible. Great. Yeah. Which is good. I mean, you know, from a mental health perspective, or like just from a like gaming perspective, like I've seen Blades in the Dark twisted and massaged and done in so many different ways. It's like, oh, okay.
Yeah. I mean, also you don't like reading rules, so yeah, vibe check all the way.
Because look, I dislike reading rules. Like I am playing a tabletop RPG exclusively for the feelings, for the talking to each other, and the like whatever hijinks our group gets up to. Like, oh, do we do a combat? I don't care. Like, oh, I have to roll initiative? That sounds lame. My turns are all the same. I'm a rogue. I backstab. That's it. But yeah, Emberwind, fantastic game. Sorry, Derek, you're going to sit here listening to us talk about your game.
Oh no, thank you for pitching me. I mean,
Yeah, it's terrible. Emberwind's a fantastic game, though. Like, the pitch that I always hear Derek give, which is pretty much accurate, is like, if there's a lot of things you don't like about D&D, it does the opposite of those things, which is really cool, right? Because if there's a thing that you don't like about a system, you maybe can find this thing here. And it's a flexible system, so I like this kind of mechanic. Great. You don't want to roll a die about a thing? Cool, we got cards. It can be a skill check, can be navigated through a lot of different ways. I don't know what I'm going to do with my character when we're not in combat. Okay, here's these cards that do this, right? That's a really cool and profound thing. And the other thing I like to call out is like the two that are already there for Emberwind are really nice for running people through something that gives them a feeling or a vibe of something that's related to mental health without like jamming it down their throats or like trying to do it in a very particular way of like, oh, this kind of whole thing revolves around relationship management with new people. Great. The game makes that explicit to you, but it doesn't just like make them like you or else, right? And I think that's really important. It's like, oh, this other module's largely about time management and how do you balance your resources to get things done.
yes, the two things most threatening to nerds.
Yeah.
Managing your time and relationships.
Yeah, which, sorry if you're going to feel weird about that when you're playing the game, but like also it's kind of fun. But it makes it explicit in a way, and I think that's a cool thing, because like a lot of the work that I have to do therapeutically is to just like talk to people and just be like, okay, it's like this, and then like later they're going, was that what you were trying to do? And it's like, it's a lot easier if the system just does that for you already, or it kind of takes you out of it in that way. Other RPG folks, things people like?
I really like 10 Candles. That's probably
10 Candles,
definite call out. If anyone who doesn't know what that is, it's a horror-based RPG, and it's a sensational one. And I don't mean sensational as like just it's great. I mean it's literally for the senses. How it works is really easy. You play with a bunch of cue cards and 10 candles that are lit. And as the game progresses, you know right from the get-go, everybody's going to die. The game always ends with everybody dead.
It's true.
But as you play through it, the game gets worse and worse, and it's based on literally when those candles go out. Whenever a candle goes out, a terrible thing happens. Whenever you try and do anything to continue the story forward, you need to roll a bunch of die, and the amount of successes out of failures you need the amount of failures that happen increases the fewer lit candles there are. And whenever you need to re-roll for like a critical moment, you're allowed to torch one of those cue cards. And when that happens, there's like a brilliant burst of light that gives you that feeling of hope in the room that you don't get with any other tabletop RPG. But you've also incinerated a part of your character. You can't play that way anymore. And it's this really, really cool, concrete version of an abstract experience that everyone carries with them after they're done a game.
You ever played Alice is Missing?
Yeah.
Alice is Missing is a pretty good game for that too. It's like you don't talk during the whole game.
Yep.
Like it's all the communication is either digital or written. It's really interesting to kind of like flip the thing on its head a bit. The actual story of the thing isn't necessarily everybody's cup of tea, But I really like those kind of things that play with your expectations of how games work, because the traditional TTRPG thing is like you all sit around a table and you roll some dice about it, and like, yes, that is a lot of them. But I like things that kind of give you different flavors of experience. All right, well then let's talk about our best board game opportunities here.
Sure.
Well, board games are great opportunities to engage a number of different people in different interactions that, while RPGs kind of cover a wide range of different experiences that evolve over time, tabletop games kind of focus it towards particular interactions that might allow somebody to kind of explore a particular theme or interaction. A couple of games that I picked out here. Your Friend is Sad.
Yeah, that's
good.
a Shen game. Yeah.
And that's certainly a thing that we all deal with from time to time. And it's nice to see that that is something that you can engage with, you can play with, you can have fun with, but there is meaning and personal kind of, not necessarily stakes, but a personal connection that you're trying to work on. So just by the bare act alone that I have a friend, I'm concerned, and they might be sad, and there might be things that can be done that I could provide. What a wonderful opportunity to kind of explore that and a sense, about society. Fog of Love is a great game
Fog of
too.
Love's a good
Do you mind if I interrupt real quick?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to shout out your friend is your friend is sad, not
Yes.
your friend is Shen.
For Shen could be your friend.
Good, sure.
Yeah, just because it's done and created by a good friend of mine, Jason Anarchy.
Yeah.
He has a bunch of other games. I just wanted to point out that he just put out a new one all about self-care.
Yes.
He is not a therapist. His games aren't always oriented towards this. They're really just stupid meme jokes. Like there's one where you're playing as a neckbeard trying to win your favorite anime waifu. And another one, his most famous one, Drinking Quest, where I am not like my dinosaur here. I am a playable character in it that you can hate on all you want. Yeah. But anyway, sorry, I just wanted to let everyone know there's a game about self-care in his portfolio as well.
Self-careless, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's a very good game.
Fog of Love, which I think a lot of us played.
Yeah.
And again, another relationship game. You don't have to necessarily play it with an intimate partner. You can play it with a friend. And what's also great about Fog of Love is it has a wide range of different sexual orientations that you can play as. And in the game itself, it's a lot of different scenarios that you might deal with your partner. And I believe there's one about COVID. There's one about that kind of lockdown situation that we all experienced. And people do experience from time to time about that isolation and working together with your partner to benefit. And it's working to kind of meet each other's needs, but also have our own personal agendas. And again, just by the vocabulary of that game and what choices and opportunities it presents you with, it opens you up to an experience of yourself and of your partnership that's amazing, that you wouldn't think was kind of available to you. And maybe now you go back to your partner and go, I know you have different needs that you need to have met, and part of those needs have to be met in concert with me, and we have to kind of negotiate and work those things out. And then finally, the Grizzled. Grizzled is a wonderful game about dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder, and especially trauma, and especially trauma in that time dealing with the war. But it's a very good game for a collaborative play in which we are all dealing with trauma together. We're all in the same boat. And again, it doesn't have to be necessarily a war motif. We can think of it as a situation that we're dealing with. And the game is very much about that cooperation that gets us out of it, gets us through that particular situation, and then right down to having inspirational quotes to rally us to kind of success. And it's a challenging, difficult game, and you may not win. It's not a happy, sunshine, fun game. This is the world in which we live. We have challenges within that world, but we have people with us, and we support each other to our better mental health.
Absolutely. A couple things on here that I just wanted to shout out that didn't really make the cut here. We're Still Good is a game that I enjoy. It's very basic, but the whole premise of the game is tapping into optimism in humorous ways despite really bad situations. So you all collectively come up with bad situations, and then you try to put a spin on the thing of what? But it's fine. We're still okay. Not always everybody's cup of tea, but it's a good one. Agree to Disagree is also pretty decent. About how you might give hot takes and you learn about how you might agree or disagree with other people. which can be really interesting in a group of people. You're, like, oh, I'm dead set convinced that this person and I are at odds. You find out through the game you aren't, and then maybe there's an interesting conversation to be had there.
And also our little friend over here has a great little tabletop game.
Yeah.
Working with neurodiverse populations.
Yeah, man, you guys won't let me get away with this without pitching myself. I'm the lead designer at a company called Nomnivore Games, and literally everything we make is designed for everybody to have a seat around the gaming table. So all of our products, from our children's books to our casual card games to even this plush, everything is made neurodivergent friendly. And we have competitive card games about stealing snacks that play a little bit like Uno meets Exploding Kittens, to also little make-believe adventure games where you ran off with your dad's D&D manual, didn't bother to read it, and now you're just beating up all your neighborhood critters and friends that you forced to dress up with your cardboard sword and rubber mallet. But all these games are built with the idea that you're navigating specifically social relations with your friends around the table and within the game. And it's not just built so that you have an experience, but one that you can carry with you, scaffold, and learn lessons from it that you can carry forward into other products. It's really not a singular game so much as it's a portfolio of things that aren't just isolated fun experiences, but can grow alongside you as you develop as a person.
We're not going to stop putting you on the spot, just so you know.
Oh, well.
Maybe not today, but, eventually. All right, so we're getting towards the end of our time here, and so just want to shout out a few different things that if anything was talked about here today maybe resonates for you, or you want like a next step, here's where to look. Here are some options that we kind of thought about. Obviously, us, Board Game Academics, we have a journal that has people talking about how they use games in educational and clinical settings. Interesting stuff there, and not even if you're not necessarily academically inclined, it has some examples of how things get used in the real world, which I think is really important.
Especially working with neurodiverse populations.
Absolutely. Several of our things were that.
Yes.
Yep. Game to Grow is a good one. They're a good resource. They do research, of course, but they also have a program for like training people how to do stuff, and they have a whole website full of stuff that's really interesting in how things might be used to help people that are going through stuff. The Badana Group is another good one, relatively local around here as far as I know. They have a lot of good stuff. They use RPGs in games. They have a couple books out that can kind of talk about how you might use gaming and gaming adjacent stuff to help people. Take This, another good one.
Mm-hmm.
They've got some like RPG modules, if I remember correctly. They've also got a website full of resources for people in the game development kind of community and how they might prioritize their mental health. So recommend them as well. Geek Therapeutics, again, you usually see them at cons and things, so they've got a lot of good stuff. They've got books, they've got trainings, they've got a lot of different things that you might access that can kind of push your knowledge a little bit further than here today. And they also have recommendations for stuff. Nomnivore, of course, Derek.
Yeah, you can just shout at me on the second floor if you have any questions.
Literally upstairs.
Yeah.
And then the last one I put on here is Nerd Adventure Therapy. It's run by a friend of mine. She does a lot of like groups and education and workshops and things like that really lean into sort of how you might use gaming to address sort of therapeutic goals and things. So if that's something you're interested in, that might be a place to look as well.
Yeah, and we also have last year's presentation.
Yes.
Here at Long Island Tabletop Gaming Expo. Yep. We had a mental health panel with our friends from Guardians Mental Health.
Yes.
And you can find that full presentation along with a counselor who uses Geek Therapeutics on Board Game Academics. That presentation's up there as well.
Yep, you can just go watch it for free. Guardians is actually a great one that I forgot to put on here. Mm-hmm. Guardians is great. They've got like little mental health like first aid kits, effectively. Mm-hmm. You can just get one.
They'll mail them out to you for free if you're not finding them at a convention. They're full of a bunch of different things, all based on the principles that we're talking about.
Yep.
For example, sometimes it'll just be like a little card that says, "Are you feeling okay?" And like you have to ask yourself a bunch of self-care questions there just to make sure that you check in. Other times it'll include little like knickknacks, like a fidget spinner if you need one, or it'll even include, let's say, codes for Steam that you can just redeem. Like, here's a free game. Forget the therapy. That's not what you need. You just need a chance to blow some heads off along with some Steam, right? And other times they'll have like specific kits designed to things like, well, you're neurodivergent. How do we help you with that? And how do we, fit you out and kit you out with all the best stuff so you can play whatever games you want? I think actually that one's about to get an update since I need to finish working on my part of that. Yeah.
Dang, Derek.
Yeah, I know.
I know they have one that's focused towards like veterans,
Yep,
PTSD
yep.
as well. So they've got a good resources out there. They also have a whole list of like sort of affiliated people. So if you're looking for like streaming content or gaming or recommendations for stuff like that, they have a lot of good stuff out there that can kind of put you in maybe a community that makes a little bit more sense for you, or that talks about these kind of things.
Yeah, actually, fun fact, their name, Guardians Mental Health, came from the fact that they emerged from a guild of Destiny players. Everyone was just like, oh, wait, we're all mental health professionals? Okay, yeah.
It's funny how those things work sometimes.
Right, yeah.
They accidentally meet each other. Other than that, that's on most of our time here. Of course, we'll be around to answer questions, comments, concerns. You want to yell at us, whatever. Otherwise, we'll be upstairs. We've got all our links here and all of that. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Cool, yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry for absconding with your chair.
No, it's good.
Yeah, you're right. I saved you all the need to talk.
Yeah, exactly.